Good afternoon, everybody. Happy Monday, and thank you for joining me today, where we are talking about end-of-year giving strategy. My name is Diana Otero. I am a product marketing manager here at Bloomerang. Prior to that, I served on the board of the Nantahala Hiking Club, one of the 31 trail maintaining clubs of the Appalachian Trail, which is a nonprofit organization driven and powered by volunteers. As a thank you to everyone who is joining us today, we would like to let you know that if you purchase Bloomerang prior to October 31st, we have a special promo for you where you can buy now, and we will delay your first payment until January 2023. The link to more information is linked in the slides. So after this session today, you will receive an email with a link to the recording and the slides. We have a lot of great resources to share with you as well, so you'll be able to see that. And just making sure, so you should be able to see my slides right now, which is saying buy now and pay in 2023. If you're not, please let me know. Thank you so much. Gary says, I like your monkey. This is Blossom, the orangutan, our mascot here at Bloomerang. So she is happy that you all are here as well. Before we officially start, I have a question for everybody who is here with us today. I want to know, how does your organization handle year-end appeals and giving? Perhaps it is notably different from your appeals throughout the year, or it's the same as your appeals throughout the year, or maybe you don't do a specific end of year appeal, or you do something completely different. And that's totally fine. But if you do, please let us know in the chat. And no judgment here or anything. I just kind of want to get a baseline of where everyone is. So we'll give a couple of seconds, a couple more seconds for folks to answer that question. So how does your organization handle year-end appeals and giving? I'm going to check the chat as well to see what other responses are coming in. So far, it looks like our year-end appeal is notably different from appeals throughout the year, is hovering about between 50 and 55%. 25% our year-end appeal is the same as our appeals throughout the year. 16% of you don't do a year-end appeal, and 5% do something completely different. Some of the responses we're getting on chat here as well. Christmas lighting with a call to action through Facebook Live, similar mediums but different messaging. Our end of year appeal is holiday giving. Appeal letters primarily, similar in approach, a bigger year-end letter. This will be the first year your organization is doing a year-end appeal. Very nice. Christmas card match appeal. I love hearing that match appeal. Fall direct mail campaign with a theme that we continue promoting through year-end on website, email, and social media. I love that you're hitting different channels there. Perfect. And a couple of more responses. I love to call out as well, the chat is a fantastic place to share insights, experiences, information that you would like to share with each other. And throughout your day's presentation, I might call on you to do that exact thing, because I would like for us to learn from each other and learn from each other's experiences as well. So if you're so inclined, please put that in the chat. You can set the chat to go to everyone, or to go through everyone, or to just go through the chat or through the panelists. I am seeing that someone has informed me the presentation we're seeing is in presenter mode. So let me try that again. Thank you for letting me know. There you go. Is that better? Yes, you should be seeing the PowerPoint for now. Thank you so much. Technology can be our friend, but sometimes it can give us some challenges as well. So thank you for doing that. All right. So we do have quite a bit to talk about today, so I'd like to get started, but please keep those conversations going in chat. And again, feel free to share those experiences and insights and strategies with each other as well. This is such a rich topic. We couldn't possibly cover everything that that at least I would want to cover today, but please feel free to share a lot of that in the chat. All right. Year-end giving can be really intimidating. It can also be really overwhelming with everything else going on right at the end of the year. So hopefully today we can give you some ideas so that you can really plan and make sure your staff is prepared. Maybe even time to think outside the box. I'm all about that creativity and really working to steward your donors and connect with them in different ways and new ways every time you reach out. So I hope we can provide you with some new ideas today. Here's our agenda for today. First of all, we're going to need to determine your year-end fundraising goals. Knowing what you raised and how much you still need to raise is going to be really important and can really do a lot in determining your strategy. We'll also talk about year-end mailing appeals and follow-ups and year-end email appeals and follow-ups. Some people treat that the same, some people do different strategies. So we'll kind of talk through some different ways to handle that. We'll talk about matching gifts. I think this is something that is overlooked at the end of the year quite a bit and can bring in quite a lot of money really close to the end of the year without a lot of work. So we'll build out a report for that. And we'll talk through that strategy. We're also going to talk about the biggest giving days of the year. That's Giving Tuesday, December 30th, and December 31st. We'll talk about holiday messaging and stewardship. We'll jump into Bloomerang and see how we can implement all this and set it up for success now instead of when those gifts start coming in. Of course, we'll have a bit of time for Q&A at the end, and we'll share some resources with you as well. As I mentioned earlier, everyone is going to receive an email with the recording and a link to these slides, and they will link out to all the resources that we share with you today. So let's talk about determining your end of year fundraising goals. One of the easiest ways to do this is to figure out what's left of your annual campaign goal. That's just saying whatever the goal was at the beginning of the year, minus the money that you've already brought in. If you're Bloomerang, you can absolutely use the campaign progress bar if you set that up for your annual campaign this year. I'll note, and we'll go into this more when we jump into the database. The campaign progress bar is going to show you what is raised. So in Bloomerang, some definitions here to help you along. Raised takes a look at pledges plus donations and recurring donation payments that have already come in. So if somebody pledged 100,000, that's what's showing up. Maybe not the 10,000 or 20,000 that they've already given in terms of a payment. So that's a big plus. That's a big pledge, plus whatever actual donations and recurring payments have come in. Whereas revenue is money or dollars that have actually been received. So not looking at pledges, but looking at pledge payments. Also still your recurring gift payments and one-time donations, but the difference being, are you counting your pledges or your pledge payments? We'll take a look at that. And I'll show you how you can pull that out into reports and give you a better idea of where you are and make sure you're really aiming for that goal and of what you have left of the year for your annual budgets. You can also use your development plan. Keyword there, if you don't have one built, we have classes on that you can take a look at as well. But you can use your development plan if you've already have one to build out to know how many appeals are left in the year and what has been planned already for the rest of the year. So part of that will be being aware of when your due dates are and who's going to be in charge of that. Who's making the changes on your website? What expectations do you have for staffing? So making sure that your staff is staggered for being off at the end of the year, and also that everyone's getting time with their families at the end of the year as well. And then making sure that everybody, your staff, your volunteers, your board knows what your stewardship plan is for the end of the year. So making sure that you have a plan or you've planned out who is thanking who, and who will be participating in that stewardship is going to be really important and can really set the tone for going into the last couple of months here as we ramp up toward January. I've said this before if you've been to one of my webinars, and I'll say it again, stewardship should never be an afterthought. That should definitely be part of your planning when you're building out what all your organization is going to be doing at the end of the year, and you should have a solid plan in place. If you've never had a stewardship plan before, this is a great year to start, and it's never too late to start it. But you should definitely start it sooner rather than later. And if you already have a stewardship plan in place, you feel free to share it in the chat. If there's templates that you've found that have been particularly useful for you, or things that you've added to templates that may have been missing from those templates, please feel free to share that as well. New endeavors like that can be really overwhelming, especially for our smaller shops. So if you have a great plan in place already for your stewardship, let people know, and then they can adapt that for themselves. It's always a good idea when you get these resources to really customize that for what you know works for your organization. Going into your mailings and appeals. So with mailings, you need to remember that this is your last big ask of the year. So again, it may be a series of last big asks that maybe some people are receiving all or only some of your appeals are going towards end of the year, depending on how you're setting that up. But you need to make sure that the people who are receiving your mail appeals are frankly worth the money to send the postage, the paper, to pay for the mail house, if you're doing all of that time and energy and resources that go into it. So I've given some examples here of who should be in line for your paper appeals. So the first one is your LIBUNT donors. LIBUNT stands for last year, but unfortunately not this year. So those would be donors who gave last year, but they haven't given yet this year. Some of those are maybe low-hanging fruit because they've given to your organization before, they know your organization, and it's pretty top of mind. You can also set parameters. This will be different for every organization. So it could be given in the last X number of years. Some people say 3 years, some people say 5 years. It kind of depends on the size of your database and the size of your organization as well, and what your donor makeup looks like. Also, people who have given certain dollar amounts can be really great segments for receiving mail appeals. So if you're going to be asking your major donors to make another gift, you'll need to set out what a major donor is and then how much additional you're going to ask. Or maybe you're going to ask the people that are really close to being cumulatively what you would consider to be a major donor. Or maybe it's everyone who's given over X amount of dollars already this year, whether it's a major donor or not. But you've decided it's worth the postage, the mail house, the paper, the ink, everything else that goes into it. For your mails, you want to make sure that there's a remittance envelope in there. That's something I've seen a lot of success with, so that it's easy for your donors to fill them out and mail back in their check or cash or credit card information. I would also recommend adding a link to your website. I know that um, for some folks, it's automatic almost to include that in your emails, but it's often overlooked in mail. But there will be people who would rather just sit down and give a gift to your donation page. So make sure they have that, and then they don't have to search around your website to get there. And that you're messaging this appeal for any year-end, you're messaging in this appeal for any of your year-end appeals. A big thing that I also want to emphasize is you need to say something that you haven't already said. So again, we're back to this creativity idea. Try a new approach. So if you've done really emotional all year, for example, maybe do something really hopeful and joyful for your year-end appeal. If you've done the hopeful and joyful, maybe talk about the goals you haven't met yet this year and get them excited about helping you meet those goals. Again, this is going to look different for each organization depending on how you communicate with your donors. And frankly, what you know works with your donors. So that's kind of what we're looking at for the appeals there. You need to decide who's getting your paper mailings, and then you need to decide what you're going to say as part of that. With your follow-ups, I recommend keeping follow-ups really short and simple, especially if you're doing a really nice appeal letter. Maybe consider a postcard. It's less money than sending another big letter, or maybe include a bunch of pictures, this time with minimal amounts of text. They've already received your big long letter. What they just need is a reminder to give. So again, make sure your URL is in there and be really consistent with the messaging. I've seen a lot of nonprofits start doing this as well, is if you have the ability to put a QR code in there that they can just scan with their phone and make a donation that way, we've seen great success with that too. So whatever you did with your main letter, just piggyback off of that for your follow-up. And I get asked this question a lot, whether they should do printed or a written follow-up. Either one is fine. You're going to ask, or you're just asking the people who haven't given yet to give. So some people find that doing a handwritten follow-up is more effective than doing another printed part of some sort. But again, you can kind of play with that. You can try half and half handwritten if you have the staffing to do that. You can even have, some people will have their board members call and follow up with their major donors, or high-level staff follow up through phone calls. There's a bunch of different options on how you can do your follow-up. I'm seeing a lot of great comments come in the chat here as well. Yes, Chad, I love that you're including a QR code on your end of year appeals that leads to the donation webpage. About 54% of donors now prefer to give online, and about 25% of donors make a donation through their mobile phone. So that's a really quick, easy thing you can do. And then you can find a lot of free resources online that generates that QR code for you, and you can include that in your mailing appeals. So I also put in here the reports that you will need, because you need to be able to identify who these constituents are that these mailings are going to. For the appeal, it's anyone you've decided to include. And then the follow-up, of course, is going to be that list minus everyone or anyone who's already given in response to the original appeal. So you can kind of build that out. Of course, you can do that in Bloomerang. You can do that really whatever database you're using. You can even do that in Excel. But today, we're going to jump into Bloomerang in a little bit and show you how you can easily get those lists in Bloomerang and how you can easily reference those reports when you're building out your letters and your emails. So no matter what you're using, we hope that you find a lot of value in the reports that we'll be showing you today. When it comes to your email appeals, you're going to see this working pretty much exactly like your mailing list. But what I recommend is if you have a long list of past donors that you would like to reach out to, but they haven't been giving yet recently, consider sending them an email if you have their email. Also, for everybody that you would normally send a paper mail to that you don't have their address, make sure that they're getting an email. So your audience is going to be the same parameters that you've picked for your paper appeal if they don't have an address. And then you're also going to send to people who are in your SciBunt report this time. So they've given at some point in the past, some years in the past, but not this year. So you can also exclude your Libunts, if they're getting your paper appeals, you can exclude them from your email list and your Scibunt list. I'll show you how to do that in Bloomerang. That will give you a list of the people who have given in the past years, but they didn't give last year. They're not quite low-hanging fruit. Some of those might be long shots, depending on how far back they've given or when the last time was that they gave, but this can save you money at the end and time as well. Instead of spending time and money to reach out to those long shots, you're still messaging to them, but it's taking less effort and taking less resources to do so. And hopefully they'll respond via email. And you'll still bring in some money without spending as much. So make sure that your messaging is identical to your paper appeal and you're really writing one appeal letter or one appeal message. You're just sending it in two different ways. In terms of some great follow-ups on the chat here. Thank you so much for sending those. I'm also seeing some resources in the chat. For example, QR code generator will revise the slides and add those to the slides as well. So you all have those links when you get the slides. And just as a refresher, your Scibunt and Libunt. Libunt is they gave last year, but unfortunately not this year. Scibunt, they gave some years, unspecified, but unfortunately not this year. So you want to make sure that your messaging is identical between your paper appeals and your email appeals, as I mentioned. Okay. So again, you can play with this. You can do a couple of different ways. In terms of your follow-up, make sure that it's short again. Some people will send an email, and then if they have an address, they'll follow up with a postcard or with a letter. That's absolutely fine. You can mix and match your different channels. Most people will just send a second email on top of that or make some phone calls. Again, if you have the numbers and the bandwidth to do so. And then make sure you're linking straight to your giving page. You would be surprised at how many organizations forget that most crucial step. And especially when you're sending out any of these types of appeals, very important as well, test all your emails. If you have the ability to send yourself a test email, send yourself a test email, click on all of those different links, make sure your links are working, and that those links are not going to change from the time that you sent your test to the time that they're actually going out, so that donors will get those correct and up-to-date links. Okay, so for the reports needed, again, anyone you've decided to include, and then of course the follow-up is that same list minus anyone who's already given to that year-end appeal that you're talking about. I kind of like to think of this as, there's an easy solicitation formula. I say that, but really, how much of a formula can you really have, right? You always want to personalize this for what works for your organization. But here's an easy formula, not the easy solicitation formula, but an easy solicitation formula that you can adapt for your organization. This is really just the outline, bare bones. We really want you to make it your own. But the first thing you really should be doing is establishing or reestablishing your donor's relationship to the organization, to your organization. Make sure they remember why they're giving, what they're doing, and how they matter as a part of your organization. You also do need to remind them of your mission. Missions are really important because people get a lot of impact out of that. They can really start to understand what their dollars are doing and where it's going. Talking about programming is great, but making sure they understand that at the end of the day, what your goals are is really what's going to drive them to decide, yes, this goal is important. Yes, what they're trying to achieve is important, and they need to be a part of that. And then gift impact statements can also be really, really helpful, especially at the end of the year. so they understand what certain amounts of money can do for your organization. Research shows that if donors who know what impact their dollars are making, they're more likely to give, and they're more likely to give even more. Or it's kind of a subtle prompt to give more if they can see, for example, if this is the impact that $5 makes versus $10, it's kind of a subtle nudge to get them to give more if they know what that impact is. This may be harder for some organizations than others, but you can phrase it in such a way where you can say, for example, $5 will buy meals for 12 shelter puppies. Now, you're not necessarily saying that their $5 is going to buy meals for those 12 puppies, but what you're saying is that's the kind of impact it can have. So be careful and thoughtful in your wording that your impact statements are not really limiting their gift and making those funds restricted. It's just what kind of things you all do with the different levels of money and the kind of impact it can have. Saying, for example, give us your money is great, but saying $25 is going to really protect children, those are two very different statements. And saying what it's going to do and how it's going to impact these children's lives, these animals' lives, these student lives, whatever kind of nonprofit you are, just relate it back to your mission. And then finally, of course, that's the purpose of the appeal. Ask them for their support. One thing I would avoid, though, is I would avoid using the line, we couldn't do this without you. Because unless this is your first year as an organization, you've potentially been doing it without them, especially if they're on assignment, a LIBUNT or SIBUNT report. So that line can be or feel a little bit trite, and it seems a little disingenuous to a lot of people. So make sure that you're just being direct and asking them for their support. Ask them to support your mission, ask them to help you achieve your goals, ask them to really make sure that their dollars have real impact at the end of the year. And that's an easy formula that you can modify for your organization. Like I said throughout here, really focusing on what is the story that you're trying to tell. Make it really interesting and make them want to read the next paragraph. That's really how you're going to ensure that your donors are really bought in and they want to give to your organization. We have a lot of resources here at the end as well. I have linked to some more tips on actually writing your appeal letters. Again, seeing some great engagement here in chat. Thank you everyone for sharing. That's fantastic. I love that. That's one of the things I'm really proud and thankful for about this community, is that sharing with everybody. A question from Karen here. It would be super helpful to be able to copy Bloomerang appeal letters into emails. You can do that. You can copy the content. You kind of have to rebuild a little bit of the formatting though. If you have someone in your organization who's a little bit more familiar with HTML, there might be a way for you to do it there, and our support team can help you do that. Fantastic. Okay, matching gifts. I was very happy to hear that someone, at least one person I saw, mentioned that they do matching gifts for their end of year appeals. I love that. So matching gifts simply are dollars that an organization gives, and that adds to the initial donation that the employee makes. So here specifically, we're talking about employer matching. And it can improve the impact of donors' dollars. So you can go ahead and soft credit these gifts back to the individuals and make sure that they're getting credit for having brought in that money as well. They're not getting the tax credit for that money, but you want to make sure that you're separating out how that's labeled so that your donors are not, if they gave $100 and their employer matched $100, they're not getting a tax receipt for $200. They're getting a tax receipt for their original $100 donation, but they're getting acknowledged for having brought in $200. Soft credits are the best way to handle that in Bloomerang. And that's a really good way to handle it in most software that we've seen and that you might use. The nice thing about this too is that you can reference making a matching gift in your year-end appeals. You can absolutely talk about that. And then one of the reports that we'll build out together will be a nice little mailer that you can do for anyone who has already told you who they work for and ask for those matching gifts. We'll build that out together. And as I mentioned as well, this brings in more money with really minimal effort. So you're not doing the legwork to get that money from the organizations, your donors actually are, but making sure that they really feel that mission and are really passionate about the work that you're doing. If their employers will match gifts and making sure that they're really bought into what you're doing, that will ensure that they're asking their employers to come back around and match the gifts to you so that their impact is greater. I saw a question here earlier around, I'm trying to get matching sponsors, have my board chasing that now for Giving Tuesday. How well does it work for end of year? This is interesting because what we're trying to be, or what we are proponents for here at Bloomerang as well, is don't take a look at Giving Tuesday as just a single day. Think of how Giving Tuesday fits into your end of giving or end of year giving strategy or fundraising strategy. You can think of Giving Tuesday as a kickoff for your end of year appeals. So absolutely, you can carry over that matching messaging from Giving Tuesday to the rest of your end of year appeals. We actually have a separate webinar on Giving Tuesday matching gifts. So if you're interested, keep an eye out for that as well. Great question. And so what we're talking about here too is this is interesting for employer matching gifts. There's other organizations out there or foundations that will match those gifts that aren't necessarily just the employers. I'll show you a little bit. If we have time, I'll show you a little bit of that in Bloomerang as well. Now, before we jump into Bloomerang, let's talk about some database terms and some database setup. So potentially you only need one appeal, but I've given some examples here. So we have our year-end appeal, our Giving Tuesday appeal, our New Year's Day appeal, or New Year's Eve appeal, potentially, and your matching gifts appeal. One note for campaigns versus appeals and how we're defining that in Bloomerang. So your campaigns are overarching efforts. So in Bloomerang, we might recommend making campaigns for things like your overall dollar goals for the year, large events, capital campaign. Those are the three main types of campaigns that you're likely going to have. Whereas appeals are ask efforts are the way that money is coming in. So asking for a Giving Tuesday gift for most organizations is going to be an appeal, unless you're doing a multifaceted Giving Tuesday approach with multiple layers of asks and a whole bunch of information on your website. Letting your donors know about your progress and all of that and trying to get organization matches. If you're doing that, that's a campaign. If you're doing a simple Giving Tuesday appeal, that would be an appeal. So same thing with matching gifts. And the same thing with your end of year appeals. So we're kind of talking magnitude here. Set most of these as appeals, but if you're doing something larger, a great argument can be made for creating a campaign for it. But in most cases, you're going to be setting up all of your year-end asking as appeals. An important thing to note for here is how are you reporting on this and how are you reporting on your progress? And that can affect how you're setting it up. All right, so now we're going to hop over into a demo and show you how you can implement some of these strategies in Bloomerang. For today, we're going to focus a lot on the reports because a lot of your year-end appeals is really going to be based on how are you pulling together those reports so you can contact your donors or you can communicate accordingly with your donors based on your strategy. So let's go ahead and do that. All right, so here in Bloomerang, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to set up our appeals. So I'm going to go into my settings, transactions, and go into appeals. So my organization here, you can see we have a couple of appeals already set up. We have matching gifts, which we talked about. We have our year-end appeal here as well. And we also have Giving Tuesday. If you wanted to, if you're doing a specific push around New Year's Eve, you could do that. So let's actually go ahead and do that now. So I'm going to click New. And I'm going to say New Year's Eve, not New Year's Day appeal. We'll do our follow-up on New Year's Day, but we're going to count this as the same appeal. Okay, now we already have our matching gifts. We already have our Giving Tuesday. We are going to have year end. What you see or what you'll notice from my appeals here as well is I'm not necessarily putting a specific year on them, because for my organization, this is something that we do year round or we do every year. And I'll just separate the years out by filtering for the date. So this is for any time it comes in. We're just going to do a specific push this year for it, but we can always reuse these appeals. Going back to the dashboard here, like I mentioned, there's a difference between raised and net revenue, and you can see that in my campaign progress bar. I love this because I can always just go in once we have a campaign going, once we've sent that appeal letter out. Actually, I like doing this on our mobile app. So if you use Bloomerang and you have the mobile app on your phone as well, that's a great place to take a look at it. But I want to bring your attention here to the campaign section. So it is showing you we have raised 81% toward our goal, and it's showing the goal amount here as well. If you hover over the thermometer here, you'll see how much has been raised toward this campaign. So again, raised, we're not talking about actual dollar amounts that have come in. So this is talking about donations, pledges, not the payments, but the pledges, plus the any recurring donation payments that have come in as well. So good to take a look at. Now, thanks, James. The Ghostbusters are the real MVPs. Thank you for that. So let's jump into our reports. And I say the difference between raise and revenue here, because when we get into our reporting, we'll take a look at how you can take a look at both of those numbers. And again, that's going to be key to how are you measuring your progress, or how are you setting your goals, and how are you setting progress towards that goal. So we're going to go into report, and we're going to start a new report. You can build reports from scratch, but you can also start from a template. We have a lot of pre-built templates in Bloomerang that you can use to start with. Again, I always recommend personalizing or customizing those reports for what your organization is looking for exactly. But all of those reports you can also build from scratch. For today, I want to see what's actually come in, so I'm going to start with a transaction report. So this is what your basic transaction reports looks like. I can also add in some extra helpful columns in a constituent report or any type of transaction report, but we're going to start with a transaction report. So this first column that we're seeing here for amount, this is the default amount column that's going to be in your report. This can be really helpful with reconciliation reports, especially monthly with your financial person or program that you're using. But we are going to add a column for our raise and revenue to show you the difference. So I'm going to add a column. So I'm just going to type in there raised, click that checkbox, look for revenue, click that checkbox as well, and add those two columns. I'm going to move those columns over here right next to the amount so we can better see what the difference is between them. As my report is refreshing, we're seeing a lot of discussion around Giving Tuesday and is it really worth the effort and how much or how little you get from Giving Tuesday. That's why we recommend thinking about thinking of Giving Tuesday as kind of a kickoff to your end of year appeal efforts. So don't just think of it as just that one day, think of it as the starting point to your end of year appeals. Lovely, great point here. Becky is saying Giving Tuesday will get a lot of donors with small amounts available, giving what they can because it's very meaningful, while the end of year appeal hits the other donors who also love the organization but may have bigger dollars available and looking for a final large tax deductible donation. Absolutely. Great discussions happening here. Thank you. Okay, so my report has refreshed and we're seeing amount, we're seeing raised amount, and we're seeing revenue amount as well. What is the difference between all of that, all of these amounts? So raised amount, these are totaling your donations, pledges, and recurring donation payments, while your revenue is taking a look at donations, pledge payments, and recurring donation payments. So really the big difference between the two is whether or not you're counting your pledges or your pledge payments. So when you think about your fundraising goals, what does it mean for you? Are you counting the pledges even though the payments haven't started coming in yet? Or are you counting the pledge payments once they've started coming in? So really think about how your organization defines having met your goals as well, and then use raised or revenue accordingly. And then again, this amount here is just kind of helpful to see everything that you have in your database. So for your end of year, you might be an organization that as long as the pledges made, you might consider that as meeting your goals for the year. That's fine. So raised amount might be what you're looking at. With that said, you might be an organization that says, hey, a pledge is a promise of money, but that money hasn't come in yet. And we need to get this much more to actually pay our bills this year. So what we need is that revenue amount. And the raise amount will go towards next year, or if you're expecting that revenue to come in next year as the payments start coming in. So again, really think about how your organization defines having met your goals. And this is going to affect as you're checking your progress towards these goals. And then you can also see we can add some filters up here. So we can add date, for example. What I really love about this is it's really easy to take a look at what date you want to be taking a look at. We have some dynamic date filters here. For example, I can say this fiscal year or last fiscal year. Oh, sorry, this fiscal year or this year. So fiscal year depends on what your organization has told the database your fiscal year is versus this year is looking at your calendar year. And really, if I want to make this kind of an evergreen report that I periodically reference and go back to, I can leave that as this year, and that will automatically adjust based on when I run this report. If you wanted to as well, you could go in here and do a specific date range if you would like. I'm going to bring that back to this year for now. And it's even more evident here. You can see the difference between my raised and revenue amounts. We have a lot of revenue that's already come in. So that's fantastic for my pretend organization. We're actually going to be able to pay our bills and do the work that we set out to do. Next, we'll take a look at the LIBUNT and SIBUNT reports. Before that, I'm going to go ahead and save this as my 2022 transactions, and then we'll jump into our LIBUNT and SIBUNT. Okay, so I'm going to click New. And we have a report template here for LIBUNT. So it's already built out for you, which can be really helpful when you're just trying to get a snapshot of who you're looking at. So you can use the LIBUNT and SIBUNT reports to take a look at or to be able to reach out to your donors. When I take a look or when I click into the LIBUNT report, we can take a look at these filters. So you can see a revenue amount of at least a penny, and date is this, or date is last fiscal year. For my organization for today, we're going to go by calendar year. So we'll change that. Really easy to do that. And of course, we want to change it in both sections. So including anyone who has given last year, but not given yet this year. And yes, so amount is just everything that you have in your database raised, and revenue, the big difference there is whether you're counting the pledge or the pledge payment. So raised amount takes a look at donations, pledges, and recurring donation payments, whereas revenue takes a look at donations, pledge payments, and recurring donation payments. So again, big difference there is when you're thinking about your fundraising goals, and if you've met those goals, would you count the pledge or the pledge payment? All right, so here we're taking a look at revenue, which we've changed that to last year and this year for calendar year, and that's going to give us our list. We can also see their latest transaction date and their latest transaction amount here, as well as their last fiscal year total. Since I'm changed my report to calendar year instead of fiscal year, I want to change that here as well. A big thing to note that it can change your results as you want to make sure those fields are consistent. So I want to change everything to be calendar year instead of fiscal year. So now we have that report set up. We can see their latest transaction date, latest transaction amount, their last year total, as well as fiscal year, as well as the year's interactions. That can be really helpful to see if they've received a mailing yet, or perhaps they've already received a phone call, and determine the amount of contact that they've already had with your organization for the year. We can take this report and save it as our LIBUNT report. So I'm going to keep editing for now. I'm going to name that as my 2022 LIBUNT and save it. And once we actually go back to our report list, it's going to appear in my report list now. And a big thing about this, it's usable for things like mailing lists. Before I go to the SIBUNT report, I want to quickly show you if we go into a letter in Bloomerang, let's say we are still building out our appeal letter, or maybe we want to start out with this solicitation mailing. Mine isn't quite set up yet. I haven't personalized it yet, but what I want to show you here is now that we've built that report, we don't have to redo the work of building out our filters again in our emails and our mailings. We can go into our add filter, search for is in a constituent report. And when I click select a report here, I now have access to all the different constituent reports I've already built in my Bloomerang database. So I'm going to click on that again. I'm going to search for my 2022 LIBUNT. And now what we're telling the system is, hey, anyone who is in that report, I want them to get this letter. And we can click OK, and I can work on personalizing that letter and sending it out. So I'm going to save that and just go back to my letter home. So any report that you've built into Bloomerang, you can use that report in another report. You can use that in a letter. You can use that in an email. Great questions here in chat. Yes, we will be sending out the recording. I apologize if I moved a little quickly there, but the point I wanted to get across is that you can use those pre-built report templates. So that report is already templated out. You don't need to build that from scratch. And the filters are already in there. So Joe is asking here, are Libans automatically created, or does the user need to tag each donor who meets this qualification? Great letter. So this, great question. So the system already takes a look at, so Libans are they gave last year, but not this year. So if I'm telling the report, the big customization I need to do there is what year am I talking about? Am I talking about fiscal year? Am I talking about calendar year? Do I want to adjust those date range? But however you adjust that, the system will automatically take a look at, do they have those gifts on their timeline? Do they have those gifts within the date range that you are looking for? And the system will automatically pick them up. And yes, Bloomerang also sends out emails. So you can see here, we've referenced that report in a letter. We'll build out our Sybun, and then we'll reference that in an email instead of a letter. Okay, so we have our Libun report, and you can see now that we've built it, it's in my recently run report list. So this time, we are going to take a look at our Sybun report, excuse me. So we're going to start from a template again. And again, you can take a look at all of these different report templates that you can start from. We're talking about our Libun and Sybun report here, but I would be remiss in pointing out, there are other segments, of course, that you can take a look at in terms of your end of year appeals. Maybe you want to take a look at high potential donors. Maybe you want to do something different for your loyal or top donors. Maybe you have a specific appeal for your monthly donors. Really, the only limit to your segmentation is what you can think of and what appetite and bandwidth you have, and what effort you want to put into all of these appeals. So going back to our Sybun. So Sybun, again, is they gave some years, but unfortunately not this year. So we'll start with that. So you can see here, has any specific transactions, the date is not specified. And for exclude, it's looking at this fiscal year. Again, we'll change that to this calendar year for my purposes today. And we will click OK. And now let's say my Libun is, they're already getting my paper appeal, and my Sybun is going towards emails. So I don't want a donor to be receiving both the letter appeal and the email appeal, which is pretty much the same. So I'm going to exclude anyone who is in my Libun report. So again, I'm going to use that same trick that we did earlier. So report, I'm going to look at or search for my 2022 Libun. Now, this report is going to give me anyone who has given in the past. But if they're already in my Libun report, because they're already getting my paper appeal, then I don't want them in this report anymore. So we have a question here from Lauren who asks, do you suggest that you always exclude those who receive the direct appeal, mail appeal from email? That really depends on you and what you know about your donors. For our purposes today, they're receiving the same messaging, so we want to keep those separate. If you want to have kind of a slightly different messaging from your paper versus email appeals, You can absolutely send that. It's just another touch point with the donor, but you can also track what your donor's communication preferences are. Do they prefer to receive paper mailings versus emails? You can absolutely take a look at that and factor that in. So I'm going to save this report. And we are going to reference that in our email. I see a request here, lots of great engagement in the chat. We'll see if we can possibly include some of the resources being shared in the slides so you all have access to that. So we've prepared our letters. Let's say we want to send an email this time to our SciBunt. You can see we have a couple of email templates here that are starter designs that you can choose from. And really, you can choose any of these and modify them however you like. So let's say, this is for a recurring donation ask, but I'll go ahead and start with that because it looks like I kind of like the layout of it, and I might want to do just some minimal changes. So we'll get into there. We won't look at personalizing the email content itself. But again, I want to show you how easy it is to include, since we've already built out our reports. Once we've built those out, we can very easily reference that report in our letters or in our emails. So we can just tell the system, hey, everyone who's in that report, I want them to receive this particular email. So in this instance, Mary's asking, does SciBunt include LIBunt? For our purposes today, we separated that out. But yes, in general, SciBunt, um, they've given some years, but not this year, and some year might include this year as well. But for here, if you need a refresher, I like doing this anyway because it's always safer to check. You can always view the filters to refresh yourself what is actually in there. Okay, so this is my SciBunt. I'm taking out my LIBunt folks because I'm already sending them a paper appeal. So we take that out here. So we'll click OK, and then we are going to go back to email home. Oh, I haven't saved that. That's okay, but I quickly wanted to answer the question that was here as well. You can absolutely check out your open rates in Bloomerang. So there's two ways you can check that. So you can go into this report, for example. Once an email has been sent out, you can see the tracking. So within each email, you'll see high-level metrics for the entire mailing. So it'll show you your delivery rates, your open stats. This is my pretend database, so you're not seeing a lot of activity here in terms of clicking a link, unsubscribe, marks as spam. It'll even tell you what clicks have been linked. But at the individual level, you can also go into that constituent and see what that specific constituent or how that specific constituent interacted with your mailings. A last report I wanted to show you today is, of course, we talked about matching gifts. And in Bloomerang, we have this a relationship report template that you can take a look at. So you can run this report, for example, and see, hey, which of my constituents, for which of my constituents do I have the employer listed? It might be worth sending a mailing or an email to those constituents, letting them know if your employer has a matching gift program, please having them consider matching your gift, and give them as much of the information as you already have to make it easy for them to give that match. So let them know your EIN, give them the language that they can just give to their employer and get that match for you. Another thing that you can do here as well, earlier we talked about what about other matching? So this is for employer matching. What about if you're looking for foundation matches. Again, we have a separate class for that, but we also have a great tool. If you've heard of Donor Search, there is an integration between Bloomerang and Donor Search where you can look at what kind of foundations might be able to give you matches based on the gifts that you already have, or a little more insight into what a little more insight into your organization's or your constituents' giving history and philanthropic capacity. So let's talk about some of the biggest donation days of the year. If you're not really sure when you should be asking, this is kind of a good template. If you've never done your event giving asks before December 31st and December 30th or New Year's Eve, a lot of people will forget as the holiday season is going, but this is a big giving day because for tax purposes, a lot of people really do feel the need to make charitable gifts at the end of the year. So really remind people this is the last giving day of the year if they want to count towards the tax deduction. And if you haven't tried something like a peer-to-peer challenge or texting, or that's something you kind of wanted to do or you think might be helpful, or even if you've done it successfully before, this can be a really good time to do it. In terms of holiday messaging, I have this great resources. I love that how you can diversify your year-end fundraising campaigns to be mindful and inclusive of cultural traditions. Outside of tax incentive deadlines, it's fair to conclude that the fourth quarter is the season most of us choose to give. It's a time when we're encouraged to think of others and those enduring the hardships of life in a world which gets physically and mentally more testing. So we have a couple of ideas here on holiday messaging, but also when we talk about the holidays, we don't necessarily mean a specific holiday by any means. By better understanding the wide cultural roots of the season of generosity, we can fine-tune the means to communicate with all who make up our communities. The holiday means many different things to different populations, so becoming aware of other holiday traditions lessens the likelihood of alienating supporters by being unintentionally or culturally insensitive. Whatever the year-end fundraising strategies looks like for your nonprofit, we can always take a look at how the season of giving looks to different group in our culturally rich communities, wherever we are. And at the core, it's really about celebration and generosity. And I mean, few other organizations do that better than nonprofits. And as I recommend, I also recommend, we've been talking a lot about year end, but think of this also as a way to start your new year off right. Encourage your donors to start the year off right, potentially with a gift. And you always want to think about your stewarding. Thank everyone for thank all your donors for everything that they did and help you achieve in the previous year. I also have a resource here for last minute year-end fundraising strategies that's linked in our slides. And I'm kind of summarizing here as, one, prioritize strategies based on potential for highest yield. Today, we took a look at the SciBunt, the LIBunt, the matching gifts. There's so many other segments that are out there. Make sure you're maximizing that for your strategies. Make telephone your friend. Segment out your best lapse donors, segment your mailings by area where improvement is needed. You have all that information about your organization and what you need, and make sure your strategy for the year end are supporting those goals. And plan as carefully for email as for direct mail. I love setting up those email nurture series because, again, it's kind of at least for me, it's kind of a lower effort. I can do more and have that go out on schedule. Get your mailing list ready and build a multi-channel strategy. So happy a lot of you I saw were already doing that. And then I also wanted to share that we have a list of resources here For you, we do have classes coming up around Giving Tuesday specifically. We have Giving Tuesday strategies, Giving Tuesday matching gifts. We have all of these resources for you. We have a new donor cultivation timeline, diversify your year-end appeals. These are the resource templates I talked about. We didn't have time today to go into actually building your appeal letters, but we have some great resources here for you. So we have appeal letters, comprehensive guide to your year-end drive, nonprofit annual report template. We have a separate webinar that talks about nonprofit annual reports, but this is another way that you can think about how you can incorporate this in your strategy and not just having it be a list or a readout. We again, the definitive year-end fundraising checklist, fundraising offers. There's so much more we can talk about, and I'm glad to see as well in the chat so many people sharing resources, sharing strategies that your organization has done, because this is such a big topic, and there's really so much you can do, and you can really get creative with it. Also, just thinking ahead here a little bit, we do have resources on your year-end tax letters once you start getting to that in the coming year. I have a poll right now just asking folks if you'd like a follow-up to learn more about Bloomerang and how it can help you in your organization. Please let us know. And again, as a reminder, we have this promo available for everyone as a thank you for joining us today. This is good until October 31st. If you buy Bloomerang now, we will delay your first payment until January 2023. Whew. There's so much more to talk about. I know this is just the start. I also did want to encourage everyone, you know, a common question I get asked is, when should I start planning for my year end? And there isn't, you can't start, there isn't such a thing as starting too early with your planning. But I also wanted to say that it can also not be too late. So don't worry if you don't already have that strategy in place. There's some little things that you can do to help you with year end, and don't feel the pressure to do everything. Whatever you can do is going to be great. It's going to yield some results. And if it's not, even if it's not what you're expecting, it's going to set you up for the future. And the learnings that you have for this year is going to inform what your strategy is going to be like for the future. Especially, I've seen a couple of you where this is your first time to be doing it. This is a great time to be experimenting, be creative, and learn. So thank you all for being with us today. We hope that this has been helpful for you. If you have additional questions, please feel free to reach out. We have a lot of great resources on our website, whether or not you're using Bloomerang, whether or not you're using a CRM. This can be useful for everybody. And thank you all again for sharing with each other. That's such a great resource. So I'm glad all of you are able to take advantage of that. As a reminder as well, this is being recorded, so you'll get an email with a link to that recording and the slides. I'll comb through the chat. I know a lot of you shared some great resources, so we'll add those in the slides as well. Thank you again, and we hope you have a great rest of your day. We hope this is a great way to start your Monday, and we hope to see you in another Nonprofit Success webinar soon. Bye. Have a great day.